the Friday Cocktail, presented by Anna Glowinski.
I'm delighted to be joined on the line by Rick Steves, because we're going to be talking all about the original Hippie trail and then how that influenced his career into becoming a travel writer. Rick, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks. Nice to be with you.
How are you doing today? Where are you? What are you up to?
I am in Seattle in the northwest of the United States, and I'm spending a day talking to people about our new book on the Hippie Trail and just thinking about what an amazing opportunity that was for me way back when I was a third of my age. I was 23 years old when I took this trip, and how the world has changed since then, and how this book kind of, the subtitle is Istanbul to Kathmandu and the Making of a Travel Writer. And it's interesting to think how this journal kind of indicated where my heart was.
And the trail back in 1978, obviously it's from Istanbul to Kathmandu.
Right.
I don't even really know where to start other than what's it like? What was it like?
Well, back then in the 60s and the 70s, it was just a thing. Backpackers, it was the ultimate road trip. The Beatles went to India to hang out with the Maharishi, and a lot of people wanted to get away from, their norm in the United States. And it was just something that any traveler dreamed about. You'd start at the pudding shop, a little cafeteria with a bulletin board where people could share notes and team up in Istanbul. And then you'd head east, and the end of the rainbow was Kathmandu in Nepal. And I'll never forget, I traveled a lot in Europe before that, but this was my graduation from college sort of adventure. Teamed up with my good buddy Gene, and when we headed east from Istanbul, it occurred to me not a soul between there and Seattle knew I even existed. Nobody knew me. I didn't know anybody, not anybody. There was no internet. We just had a few traveler's checks in our money belts and a dream to get to India and Nepal. And it was an odyssey. And for some reason, I had this passion to take notes, to fill up a journal. And I was just 23. Everybody was just having a good time. But I diligently wrote a 60,000 word journal, and I documented it with photographs. And then when I was done with the trip, I got home, life took over, just put the journal in a box. 40 years later, and so, the pandemic hits. I hadn't even looked at the journal, and I read it. It's a hardback empty book that I bought before taking this trip. And it was just like taking an anthropological dig into a 23-year-old version of myself. Now, people who know what I do, I'm a travel writer. I write guidebooks. I've written 60 or 70 guidebooks about Europe. I make a TV show. I lead groups around Europe. I have 100 colleagues in my company, Rick Steves Europe, and we love to help Americans. Our mission is to equip and inspire Americans to venture beyond Orlando. And the whole idea is, get out there and explore the world. It's exciting. You don't need to be afraid of it. Well, this book was written when I was still a piano teacher, and it was long before I had ever written a guidebook. I wrote it just for me. Mm-hmm. It was candid. It was honest. It was rough. It was not politically correct. It was vivid. And when I read it now, I just, I can learn a lot about myself, and I can also learn a lot about travel. And this amazing trip sort of provided the foundation for the work that I've done ever since then. And a lot of people say, I wish we could do that. The trip is not 1978 with a bunch of hippie backpackers going from Istanbul to Kathmandu. It's somebody coming of age, leaving home with the philosophy that you can learn more about yourself in your home sometimes by leaving it and looking at it from a distance. We can be part of this world. It's just a beautiful thing to get out there and realize that the United States is 4% of this planet. We're a good 4% of it, but there's a lot out there that we can get to know and appreciate and respect. And people can have their own hippie trail today.
And when you read back those words, do you still recognize yourself? And as a traveler, do you still see things in the same way as that sort of young man starting out?
I do, but when you get older and more comfortable and you got more money, you like a little more comfort in your travels, and you're a little less willing to take risks. And you want things organized. Back then, there was really no good information for this. People were sharing notes and rumors, but we didn't know. I mean, coming into Afghanistan, they said, be careful when you change money because they've changed the currency and you got to get blue money, not green money. And I didn't know which money was going to work. I didn't have any money to waste. We were living on $3 a day. We didn't know exactly what we were getting when we changed money. We didn't know what they were going to ask for at the border. We didn't really know when we went into that bucket shop in India to buy our one-way flight back to Europe, if this was a legitimate ticket. So, it was that kind of adventure, and there was no safety net. But it was a thing, and you had a community of people going on this trail. It was a long way from Istanbul to Kathmandu, and you met the same Aussies and the same Brits and the same Canadians and Germans and French people all along the way, because there was this community, making this pilgrimage. And it was just, it's this beautiful idea that culture shock is a constructive thing. We didn't want to avoid culture shock. We wanted to celebrate the culture shock, understanding that culture shock is, the growing pains of a broadening perspective. And we were getting we were broadening our perspectives. Did I know that at the time? No, we were just having fun. But when I look back on it, it was fun to think how naive and how green I was, but how this was creating the traveler that I would become. One thing I took away from it, Anna, was the understanding that, boy, you need information in order to travel well. And that's kind of what I've dedicated my career and my life to, is gaining experience, organizing the lessons from that experience, and sharing it with people. That's what I do with my TV shows, with my guidebooks, with my tours. And on that trip, it was the greatest trip of my life, and it was done pretty much without information.
And you talk about culture shocks just then. I'd like to go back to that point. In a less maybe hippie way, because you mentioned how it broadens your horizons. What about some of the more practical culture shocks? What did you actually see? What are some of the standout moments that you can remember being like, oh my goodness, what have I just walked into?
Well, the whole trip was just a parade of those kind of eurekas. We in Istanbul, we had to buy a 2-day bus ticket to Tehran. We bought our ticket. We were seats 13A and B or whatever. When we went to the yard where the buses were, everybody rioted to get onto that 2-day bus ride. And we thought, what are they rioting for? This is civilized. We got seat numbers. So we strolled onto the bus, the last two people, and every seat was full. Seat numbers didn't matter. And there were 2 makeshift seats that were added as an afterthought over the stairwell in the back of the bus that did not recline. And those were our seats because we didn't stampede on there and get seats beforehand. So we were a little culture shock. We're realizing, seat numbers don't matter that much. You could, you get to a place like Afghanistan, and it's just, you get to the border. It's the most godforsaken place you can imagine. And this border is in the middle of a desert separating the Iranian and the Afghan people. And it's littered with minibuses that are just taken apart. And customs officials thought these hippies with the minibuses had drugs on them, so they just took the buses apart, and the hippies didn't have a bus anymore, so they carried on. And there's these carcasses of the buses. And then in the customs office, there's dusty, dirty old glass cases that are museum exhibits that tell you about people who tried to smuggle drugs across the border, where they tried to hide it, how they were captured, and where they're in prison right now. Just a friendly little reminder for people when they're crossing borders over there, don't do anything funny. Then you get to Herat, and you realize you don't need a guidebook. You just walk in a different direction every day, and it entertains you. And you meet people. You meet people that really are put there to make your trip more interesting. I was at a cafeteria in Afghanistan. I'll never forget, a man sat down next to me and he said, "Are you an American?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Can I join you?" And I said, "You already have." And he said, I want you to know I'm a professor here in Afghanistan. And a third of the people on this planet eat with spoons and forks like you do. A third of the people eat with chopsticks, and a third of the people eat with fingers like I do, and we're all civilized just the same. So here's this Afghan gentleman, and what he does at lunch is he sits with an American tourist or American backpacker, and he makes this point. I eat with my fingers. I bet you think I'm less civilized, but we're all civilized just the same. And, I thought, well, you got a chip on your shoulder. But then I thought, no, you were really right. I thought less of you because you eat with your fingers. And then I thought, that's an organic, beautiful thing. God gave us our fingers to nourish ourselves. There's probably a drawer somewhere with a bunch of dirty metal utensils, but he chose to eat with his fingers. And I realized I don't need to do that, but that's a beautiful thing. That's what I like about that part of the world. It just really wallops my ethnocentrism, and it makes me less self-assured that I'm doing it right and we're the norm, because we're not the norm. People who sit on a toilet to go to the bathroom are not the norm on this planet. I went on airplane in India, and there's a decal with a stick figure over the toilet that explains to people how you don't stand on the rim and squat over it.
Wow. Yeah, like you say, you just take so much for granted, but toilets are pretty new and unusual and only in very specific parts of the world. It's a good point. That particular trip, that hippie trail, have you ever gone back and done it since?
I've gone back to India since. India, okay. I just love India. But, the interesting thing about this trail was I did it in 1978, and that was I didn't know it at the time, but that was the last year the trail was open, because after that the Shah fell, and Ayatollah turned Iran into a theocracy, and you really couldn't travel through there. And the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, so the war started there, and you couldn't travel through there. So you really couldn't do that trail after the year I did it. And so I happened to do it at the perfect time in my life. I happened to diligently write that journal, and the journal survived. I took photographs. Kids didn't take a lot of photographs back then, or didn't document their trip with photographs. They took pictures of each other, but they didn't really, document the trip. And I documented the trip. I don't know why. Again, I wasn't a travel writer. I was a piano teacher, just taking a summer break. But all that survived, and today it's a remarkable bit of travel history, and I'm just really happy that On the Hippie Trail is out, and it shows a little insight in the coming of age trip of Rick Steves, who went on to write guidebooks all over Europe and do the conventional thing. But this was kind of that adventurous, in the rough, youthful foundation from where that love of travel came, and the appreciation of the value of travel. Because, travel is more important than ever these days, especially for Americans to get out and not be afraid of the world.
I wanted to say what should I find weird about that story is that you've not looked at these notes until 40 years later, but you did become a travel writer. And I would have thought the more normal course of action is those notes, those photographs, that documentation was something that you immediately revisited, sent to, publishing houses or something like that, and from there became a travel writer. So how did that trip, or from that trip, then how did you actually get your foot in the door of creating that new career?
Well, that was not Europe. I decided to focus on Europe, and every year I wrote a journal like that. I've spent 100 days a year in Europe. Ever since I was a kid. It's where I take my summers and I travel. And at first I was just having fun, but I was learning from my experience. And apart from that hippie trail trip, my focus was teaching people how to travel in Europe. So, and I had a journal for each year. I bought these hardback empty books. And I just didn't take the journal very seriously. My life was full with travel experiences every year, and they were all about writing guidebooks in Europe. So this was kind of an aside. And I knew it was there, but I never really sat down and read it. But then during COVID, I had, it was kind of a sabbatical and had time to read it. And I recognized that it was about travel from an age that was quite different. Today there's too much information. We need to curate the information. Back then there was not enough information. I would walk up and down the bus when we were heading, on a 6-hour bus ride in Iran or something like that. And anybody who was a Westerner on that bus, I'd ask them if they had any information that I could read. And I would just, take notes on that information because we were hungry for what's around the corner. Do you need a visa here? Is this dangerous? How do you go over Khyber Pass? And, there was that firsthand reporting, but nothing very well organized.
Okay, and I've got a question for you, a sort of challenger point of view question, because I've just picked up on you saying that now more than ever, travel is really, really important. Now, we live in a world where climate change is a big concern, people getting on aeroplanes, short haul flights, that sort of thing. We also live in a world where, at least over here, every university graduate has taken a gap year and they've traveled to broaden their horizons and they put it on their CV. And it used to mean a lot, but I don't think it means very much in the eyes of an employer anymore, because it's just like, oh, so you're another one of those people who's traveled to broaden your horizons. Why in this climate would you say that travel is more important than ever? And is it different? What would you say that traveling these days for people when they're 23, as you were, is a different experience for how it was for you?
I think fundamentally travel's the same today or when I was a kid. I think the value of travel is something where the problems that will confront us in the future are going to be blind to borders and impervious to walls. And when we travel, we gain an empathy for other people's struggles. We realize we're all in this together. We get to know our enemies, and we realize the fragility of our environment. We realize the importance of good governance, the importance of tackling problems, embracing science and the truth. And I'm talking about from an American point of view, you realize that you really can't go it alone. You've got to be part of the family of nations. There are two kinds of people in the United States these days. Some people who want walls and some people who believe in bridges. The irony is people who want walls want to be safe. Well, if you really know what's going to make you safe, it's not walls, it's bridges, because we've got to be connected with the world. These people that only want walls in the United States, they are people likely who are afraid of the world, who've never traveled, whose worldview is given to them by commercial news media. The most frightened people in this country of ours are the people who don't have passports. They've never been out. They don't say bon voyage. They say have a safe trip. For me, fear is a dangerous thing. Wannabe autocrats from the left or the right can capitalize on our fears. Trump is certainly doing that right now in the United States. And the flip side of fear is understanding. We gain understanding. We get stronger when we get out and we understand the true context, and we shape our own worldview through travel. So this is really important. And then you've got the environmental issues and, of course, the existential problem of climate change. You can be flight shamed out of your travels, and I think that would make the world a more dangerous place, because we'd all be more susceptible to fear-mongering wannabe autocrats, and we'd let other people shape our worldview instead of first-hand experience. My feeling is, to be ethical, we need to mitigate our carbon. You got to invest $30 in climate-smart agriculture in the developing world smartly in order to create as much as good as I create bad by flying from Seattle to Frankfurt and back. So that's ethical. It's not heroic. It's just baseline, but I think it's ethical. And then you got to travel in a way that minimizes your carbon footprint and that maximizes your perspective broadening. I think one of the most beautiful souvenirs is to come home with a dual citizenship, bigger appreciation of what it means to be an American, and also a global citizenship. So that when you go into the privacy of the voting booth, you don't just vote for your own well-being or your own financial interests in the short term or your family's safety. You vote for what is good for society. And if you're a person of faith and you believe there's a God, well, when you travel, it becomes pretty clear that if there is a God, we are all children of that God, and that makes us all brothers and sisters. And when we travel, we get to know the family. And I think when the family is having some communication problems, it's good to get to know each other. When we travel, it makes it tougher for the people we meet, countries, to demonize us with their propaganda. And then when we come home, it makes it tougher for our country to demonize those people with our propaganda. It makes us stronger. It contributes to the fabric of our communities and our democracy. And that is assuming you're traveling. That's assuming you're reality travel instead of La La Land travel. And that's, again, what my mission is as a traveler. So,
sort of authentic traveling. Joe, that was a very, very strong answer. I vote Rick Steves for president of the world.
I've got to run with another interview, so thanks for the interview.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, we'll wrap it up there. Bye-bye. Thank you to Rick Steves. His book is called, let me just get to the title again, On the Hippie Trail, Istanbul to Kathmandu, and the Making of a Travel Writer.